How's it going, everyone? Mike the War Host here, and today we're continuing with Spooktober 2023 and talking about one of the newer hex posses available, the Path of the Chronozon. When the new edition of Mythos was released last year, 4 new factions were introduced into the game from Wild West Exodus. At the same time, 3 Mythos factions were added into Wild West Exodus, the Path of the Chronozon and the Wildborn as hex posses, and the Silver Venators as an order posse. Since an order posse doesn't quite fit into the theme this month, we won't be talking about the Venators for a while. The Path of the Chronozon posse centers around Chester Barreman, his motley collection of cultists, and his pet demon spirit thing. A lifetime of academic study led a young Chester Barreman down a rabbit hole of esoteric knowledge centered around a demon named Chronozon. After an experiment with a vial of RJ-1027 and the subsequent possession of Barreman by Chronozon, the young scholar quickly became a charming and engaging cult leader dedicated to the Path of Chronozon, as well as thwarting the plans of the hated Spica and their masters in the All-Shard. For reference, we will be using stat card and handbook version 3.04c for today's discussion. Like his faction rules in Mythos, the Path of the Chronozon posse centers around Chester Barreman and his obsession about the path regardless of its consequences. After this posse loses 2 units with the Chronozon trait, Chester gains a +1 bump to his fortune and limit values. After 2 more deaths, Chester gets another bump to his fortune and limit, making him incredibly potent on the board. The Path of the Chronozon box contains 7 models and comes in at 89 points. Chester Barreman, Lydia Heron, John Talbot, Elizabeth Talbot, Edward Carter, Jane Carter, and the spawn of Chronozon. Since this is a hex posse, you also have the option to bring a free hexalith along. Chester Barreman is your posse boss and is well deserving of not only his position but the legendary keyword as well, even at the start of the game. He comes with Dark Council to get a free action out of any nearby tainted units, Embrace the Hex to try giving other units the tainted trait, Enervate to potentially remove fortune from enemy models, Expose their weakness to make attacks with brutal hit even harder, Immune to Pain to completely ignore the hazard condition as well as the first point of piercing from most attacks, and Malefic Aura to help nearby hex units from incoming fire. The most interesting ability Chester has is called Leeched Ability, which lets him replace one of his attributes with one from a unit he just killed. So with proper planning, Chester could end up with a serious crit boost as well as his other buffs from the posse bonus. He also comes stocked with a limit and fortune value of 4, which only increases as the game goes on. His weapons are just as formidable. He comes with the standard hex bolt for ranged attacks that have shred and lethal on a crit. He also has his melee Spectre of Chronozon attack with refined and brutal on a crit, as well as a 3-inch range, an ROA of 2, and an impressive -4 piercing. This attack does have the special quality, so don't expect to use this during every activation. For regular melee attacks, he has a Spirit Claw with Attune that can hit with -2 piercing attacks if focused. Lydia Heron is Chester's devoted acolyte and comes with a bevy of interesting rules of her own. She has the same leeched ability that is common with a path, as well as Eye for the soft parts for additional brutal wounds. Walk the Path lets Lydia and a nearby Path of Chronozon unit take a free move action after deployment. Rejuvenate replenishes a nearby unit's fortune. Shoulder to Shoulder gives her a grit bonus when in base contact with other units with the same rule. And Senior Cultist forces Lydia to become the initial target of any attack targeting Chester if she's within 5 inches of him. The interesting part of Lydia's rule set is Gene Link. Whenever Lydia kills a unit and swaps out one of her attributes for one of her targets, she can instead transfer that new attribute value to another unit with the same rule that is within 20 inches of her. And since Gene Link is so prevalent amongst the cultists in this posse, it's a great way to buff some of the less than stellar units on the roster. Lydia comes with the standard hex bolt for ranged attacks, as well as a Fell Blade that has brutal and attuned, as well as fatal on a crit. Don't forget Eye for the soft parts, adding an additional wound to brutal as well. For the remaining cultists, I'm going to lump them together since there's not much separating them. They come with Embrace the Hex to spread some tainted love, and yes, you have to make that joke whenever using this ability. Gene Link to get some attribute boosting from Lydia. Immune to Pain to completely ignore the hazard condition, as well as the first point of piercing for most attacks. And Shoulder to Shoulder for a grit bonus. The men have Man Catchers with Refined and Tangle along with Brutal on a crit, as well as some throwing knives for short range attacks. The women have Meat Hooks with Brutal and a -2 piercing on a crit, as well as the same throwing knives. The big downside to them is a meager fight and aim value of 4, which will hopefully be boosted as the game progresses. The last unit in the Posse box is the Spawn of Chronozon, a giant beast that can easily ruin your opponent's day. Absorbed Essence essentially robs any non-legendary unit of their fortune and gives it to the spawn for that activation. Leech's ability lets it steal an attribute from a killed unit. Malefic Aura provides a buff to nearby hex units. Monstrous forces rerolls on successful morale tests, and Volatile sets units within 2 inches of the spawn on fire when it dies. And since the spawn is on a size 3 base, that has the potential to hit a lot of units. An important note is that the spawn only has access to metal. No Quicken the Dead or target priority for this otherworldly abomination, so plan accordingly. The spawn comes with a set of Spirit Claws with attuned for some extra sharp swipes, as well as a Telekine Smite attack with attuned blast and close work, as well as shock on a crit. Remember that you won't be able to focus any actions if you compel the spawn to attack, so you'll be stuck with the base piercing. So now that you know what you get in the Posse box, what's the best way to put together a tournament-ready list? First off, take a look at the Path of the Chronozon Posse in the Hex Handbook. You also get the option to take a unit of Hex Cutthroats and Hex Gunmen as well. I'd recommend grabbing both just to act as additional fodder for Chester's Posse bonus. They might not last that long on the table and will more than likely fail a few morale checks due to Twitchy, but these guys aren't there to be a force multiplier. They're on the board solely to quickly get Chester Fortune and limit bonus. You might be able to get some additional firepower out of them thanks to both Stone Cold Killer and Tainted, but that's nothing more than a happy bonus if it happens. Bringing along a 5-man unit of both Hex Gunmen and Hex Raiders brings your points total up to 119. For the remaining points, I'd recommend bringing along a generic Hex Posse with Megan Wild as the boss, utilizing her underboss special rule as well as Maria Torres Villa for additional portal shenanigans to get units up the board faster, like your Sacrificial Hex Infantry, for example. This posse is pretty straightforward. Throw as much chaff at your opponent as possible to get Chester as buffed as you can, as quickly as you can, then let him go to town. Use Lydia's Leech ability and Gene Link rules to buff specific cultists, the Spawn to Tar Pit, and Maria to help get people into position quickly. Megan will be nothing more than a Hexbolt turret once her and Maria get the portals established. Well, that's going to do it for me today. Stay tuned for more Wild West Exodus, Mythos, Fog and Friction, and Dystopian Wars content in the near future, as well as some looks at Lost World Exodus in the not so near future. Maybe. At some point. Please? Alright, take care everyone.
Sometimes